Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. Malcolm Hoenlein, my colleague and friend, Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, just back from his extremely successful entertainment for many hundreds of people in New York at the Waldorf Astoria, 50th anniversary of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. And Malcolm and I will have more to say about this tonight, but I want to say right now, there are 51 organizations that participate in the conference. And what I've learned is that the number matters a deal because they all come together and can speak with one voice when it comes to matters of threats to Israel, threats to the people of Israel, and especially to American Jewry. And it is not one party or one voice of American Jewry. There are many opinions, and the conference gives everybody a chance to speak because you're, an education organization as well as people as advocates. Is that all correct, Mel?
That is absolutely correct, but we deal with America's national interest. We deal with human rights, the UN, any national, international issue that impacts American Jewry, U.S. interests, and of course the U.S.-Israel relationship. And it is the theme of the event was strength through unity, and I think it really is underscored today more than ever about the need for those who stand for the right things to stand together.
Unity. There is an example of disunity right now. Those who wonder what anarchy is going to look like, what it has looked like in the past. Look at this. Look at Syria. Look at the civil war of Syria. And very active, violent, predatory action in Syria is an organization called the Party of God. In the language of Syria, Hezbollah, Party of God. And Hezbollah is long-standing, presents itself as two parties, one that does social services and is uplifting and does education, and the other one that is a military wing. They play the double game that, say, the IRA played once upon a time. But recently I saw a video. There are lots of videos coming out of Syria. They're horrible. I don't recommend them, but I did view this one, where Hezbollah soldiers were boasting about their successes by executing captured soldiers, they said, who were Alawites. It was brutal, it was ruthless, and it certainly represented the threat that Hezbollah has represented to the whole region for decades. A new book, Hezbollah, is just published in paperback actually it's an uncorrected advanced proof, so it looks like a paperback, but it's coming as a hardback soon enough by Matthew Levitt. Matthew joins us right now on air because I'm concerned to go immediately to the Syrian threat. Matthew, your book very carefully explicates where Hezbollah comes from, how it is a global organization, but they've launched tens of thousands, it looks like tens of thousands of fighters and support into Syria. Is Hezbollah gambling that they can be successful in Syria and in defending the Assad regime? And if they fail there, does Hezbollah fail? Good evening to you, Matthew.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be back on the show. Thanks for having me. It's not tens of thousands in Syria. It's more like 4,000 to 5,000, but there are 4,000 to 5,000 trained commandos who are making all the difference. Hezbollah and Iran both are all in on behalf of the Assad regime, and while the international community on the other side dithers and figures out what, if anything, to do in support of the rebels, who at one time were dominated by rebels and are now increasingly also Al-Qaeda and other radicals amongst them, Iran and Hezbollah, meanwhile, are all in on behalf of the Assad regime. The thing for Hezbollah is this presents an existential crisis for them. At home, they've long tried to make the argument that they're Lebanese first, not Shia or pan-Iranian proxies, and it's very difficult to make that case when they're doing something, fanning the flames of a sectarian violence that knows no boundaries and has already brought violence back into Lebanon. It's clearly not in Lebanon's interest. And for a group that tries to make a distinction between terrorism and resistance, we in the United States, of course, see Hezbollah as a terrorist group. They describe this as resistance. The only thing they're resisting now, it's not Israel, it's not Jews. They're resisting fellow Muslims.
You have done something that's, I think, a unique service in bringing to light the true nature of Hezbollah. People talk about it as a limited operation, perhaps in Lebanon, perhaps in the Middle East. But in fact, the theme of your book is that it is a global network of terror and beyond terror of crime. So could you address two things? One is, what is the actual global structure? Is it one centralized office giving instructions? And second, what is the interconnection between the crime part and the terrorism part?
So first of all, Hezbollah is lots of things. The problem is that there's a lot of literature out there, some of it's even good, about Hezbollah as a political movement, as a social welfare organization, a militia in Lebanon, and it really is all those things, whether we like them or not. But there's no literature on its covert activities, on its terrorist or international organized crime, criminal activities, and that's what I was trying to get into with the book. The structure is amorphous. There is a clear hierarchical structure within the Hezbollah leadership in Lebanon, and the security entities and the terrorist wing, the Islamic Jihad organization, report to a Jihad committee, which in turn reports to a Shura, or consultative council, which is led by Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah himself. But internationally, Hezbollah has all kinds of different types of networks that fall across the spectrum. At the far end, you'll have a small number of highly trained, really, really dangerous people, and we've had a small number of those people even here in the United States. At the other far end of the spectrum, you'll have people who honestly don't believe Hezbollah has ever done a bad thing in its life. It's just a nice organization supporting Shia when no one else will, and so they send money back. And of course, you'll have everywhere in between on that spectrum. So some of these networks are dispatching hardened terrorists to do things like blowing up Israeli embassies or Jewish community centers, as they did in Argentina. And others are to engage in criminal activity, abuse of charity, etc. There's actually no organization, no terrorist organization out there that is engaged in more criminal activity, from petty crime like watered-down baby formula scams and cigarette smuggling, to serious organized crime, not the production of drugs, but the movement, the transportation of drugs, and laundering the proceeds of drugs from South America to Africa and into Europe. No one does it more than Hezbollah.
Well, could I just ask, what is the intersection also with the Iranian intelligence network and structure?
The reason some people refer to Hezbollah as the A-team of terrorism isn't because they're necessarily more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. It's because they're better trained at the art of espionage, counterintelligence, and operational security than any other terrorist group, and they get this from Iran. They also get millions of dollars, we believe about $200 million a year from Iran. And of course, Hezbollah has about 60,000 rockets courtesy of Iran. But by virtue of having this relationship that's beyond just ideology and theology, which of course is the bedrock of the relationship, when Hezbollah wants to do things abroad, it's able to use Iranian embassies, Iranian diplomatic pouches, Iranian passports, diplomatic passports, and that, of course, gives them a tremendous edge. Sometimes they will engage in operations together with the Quds Force from Iran, and sometimes on their own, but this always gives them a huge advantage.
The attack in Bulgaria, 2012, what did that gain Hezbollah?
Well, sometimes Hezbollah does things, and you might explain them as somehow being in its own interest. For many attacks, for example, they were trying to get their jailed comrades jailed around the world in Kuwait and Germany, freed, comrades who were arrested for carrying out acts of terrorism around the world. In other cases, they do things at Iran's behest. And in the case of Bulgaria and other attempted plots that failed, this had nothing to do with Hezbollah's own interests or Lebanon's interests. It didn't even have anything to do with avenging the death of their terrorist mastermind, Imad Mughniya, who was killed in 2008. This was simply Iran telling Hezbollah, we want you to help us exact the cost against Israel for its efforts to undermine our nuclear program. It's part of the shadow war with the West. And it's a very critical time now to be thinking about this in October. This is 30 years since the bombing of our Marine barracks in Beirut. It's 30 years ago now this month. And that started it all. That started Hezbollah targeting the West, first in Lebanon, then in the Gulf and Kuwait, then in Germany and more. And we know for a fact now from declassified intelligence that 2 weeks before that bombing, U.S. intelligence intercepted a communication from Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security in Tehran to the Iranian ambassador in Damascus, telling him to reach out to someone who would soon become a senior leader in Hezbollah and to have him carry out a spectacular action against the U.S. Marines. Now, unfortunately, that only made its way to the U.S. bureaucracy and got to the desk of someone who could do something about it 2 days after the bombing. But we know for a fact that this was done at Iran's behest, and that's something that continues to today.
Matthew, final question. We just have 30 seconds here. Can we treat Hezbollah as if it's North Korea, the Middle East? They do things for hire. They need cash.
No, it's unfortunately much more complicated than that, because they do some things for hire, they do some things for themselves. They get plenty of cash through Iran and plenty of cash through criminal activities, but they're also part and parcel of Lebanon, and in Lebanon, not only are they part of the government, they're not illegal. It makes them much more complicated to deal with.
Matthew Levitt. He is at the Washington Institute, where he heads the Stein Program on Counterterrorism and Intelligentsia. His new book is Hezbollah, the Global Footprint of Lebanon's Party of God. Matthew Levitt, Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. I'm John Batchelor.